Hi, I'm Melody Spangaro and I'm one of 14 artists from around the globe who are about to embark on Lair Art's Drawing Research Residency, which was due to be held in Paris in March earlier this year. It's due to the extraordinary changes that have happened everywhere that I'm talking to you from my lounge room in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, Australia. I wanted to share with you my favourite palette, which is very monochromatic. I use a synthetic substrate at 200 GSM, which I buy in a roll, but you can source a similar product in a sheet or in a smaller pad, depending on what size that you like to work in. I use a woodless graphite, both solid and soluble, and a couple of different brands for different textures and slight variations in colour. This large block is quite hard and a little scratchy. The art graph, which I'm using now, is quite a soft stick, and the Lyra is very smooth and great for detail. So you can make a mark and just activate it with a bit of water. My favourite is this watercolour graphite made by Artgraph, which comes in a palette, which you can use as you would a normal, any watercolour. But I prefer to take it out and soak it for a couple of days and wait for it to start to solidify again. I usually have a couple of tubs on the go at varying stages of dryness. You can also buy it in a putty form, but I find that dries out really quickly. And there's powdered graphite or charcoal, which I use occasionally, but you need to work outside with that. This one is a watercolour ground. So you can prepare your own surfaces. I've started working on board, and my favourite brushes. I use a large brush and this brush in particular for most of my drawings. Even though it would be sensible to vary the size, I tend to just chip away with the same little brush, and my hands. So another thing I use is a cotton bud or a cloth to remove areas or move it around. As you can see, you can go back into it when it's on the surface but not completely dry. It'll move. You can push it around a little bit. I can sometimes go back in and work over the top in charcoals, and my process is a lot of addition, subtraction. So I have a variety of different textured cloths, sheepskins and rubbers to play with the surface. I use mainly water to take away the graphite for the bulk of the drawing until I get towards the finished work, and then I'll start to use an eraser. Using a rubber or an eraser on the surface tends to leave a bit of polish, and it's much harder to work into again later. So it's one of the final marks I'll make in a finished work. This is a small stop motion demonstrating a process that I've been playing with while restrictions have been enforced due to COVID-19. Over the last couple of months I haven't had access to a studio, so For me, working on a smaller scale is proving interesting. It's given me the opportunity to play with mediums and techniques that I wouldn't normally explore. This work is on a small board, about 60 centimetres by 60 centimetres. It uses the watercolour ground that I showed earlier in my palette, and because of the base and the absorbency in the watercolour ground, it's a matter of building up layers rather than being able to apply and then remove, apply and remove. These stills were spliced up and became part of a short video interspersed with audio from the devastating fires that we had over 2019 to 2020 here in Australia, and in particular an area called Kajua, which was one of the hardest hit areas near the border of New South Wales and Victoria. So to start each drawing on a synthetic substrate with graphite, I would cover over the area with a very watery, thin film of graphite and continue to move it around with a brush, sometimes my hand, and then finally with a sheepskin to polish off as it dries. And then building the layers up until I get the right depth of ground that I want to start from. At this stage, you can determine how much texture you want in the ground, and if you wanted to apply some sort of pattern or patina, this is where I would do it. It's much harder to do it later. I usually, using water and a brush, and a cloth, start to remove areas that I want to remain lighter. It's much easier to pull them off now and than to try and recover the paler surface later on. It's the thinking, doing action of drawing which appeals to me. It's really a timeless media of expression. Drawing has many languages, histories and processes intrinsically intertwined with time, space and culture. So for me, I see drawing as a process which facilitates an investigation through the rendering of feelings, what I see, what I remember, and it becomes a realization which is transmitted from the mind directly to the hand as like a non-verbal language with the ability to explain things that I can't yet describe in words. At this stage of the drawing, I'd still be feeling my way around the composition. I may start with an idea or something I've seen and work from there, but I find it's about a third of the way through the drawing kind of reveals itself and I understand a little better where it needs to go. But it's quite frustrating up until that point when it's almost like drawing blindfolded for me. The focus of my drawing over the last few years is really centred around mankind's intersection with nature. Human ingenuity, in particular the extractive capitalism systems, has really transformed the face of the planet. The trace of man quite literally marks the world's surface and could be interpreted as a drawing of the Anthropocene. From any elevation, we could look down upon man's mark-making, the crisscross of roads and highways, the patterning of agricultural fields and plantations, boundary structures, industrial sites, quarries, open-cut mines, cities, towns, buildings, power lines. The methods are endless, but the results undeniable. The challenge for me as a contemporary drawer has been to figure out what tools I have to incite conversations around the current ecological crisis. My concerns are that as global warming continues and species are becoming extinct at an ever-increasing rate, as ecologies decline and technologies advance, with a flood of information being not necessarily knowledge or understanding, is moving us from a thinking action position to passive observation. While I'm consumed with the complexity of our world, in particular social consciousness in relation to our environment, I feel a responsibility and embrace the opportunity I have as a visual artist to interact with the issues that have the power to incite or influence activism and public change. This demonstration is based on a drawing that I completed about this time last year called Disorientation. The drawing depicts an agave plant. Agaves are an introduced species which are now widespread in tropical, subtropical and warm temperate regions around the globe. I came across this plant last year when I was travelling and I was really perplexed by this plant that had spent years and years and years working towards this absolutely incredible, monumentally large and beautiful flower spike, but didn't have the foundation or the root system that could actually support it. And after flowering, it simply toppled over. This visual struck me as a metaphor for many of our current global economic, cultural, political and environmental systems, highlighting their terminal impermanence and constructive instability. This is one reason I work on plastic with graphite. I'm very conscious of the fact that the plastic will remain for centuries, yet a simple addition of water will erase the drawing completely. So now I would continue to build layer upon layer of this drawing and occasionally wipe off great swathes only to rework areas for a number of weeks until I was happy with the depth and the complexity. And you could introduce colour. You can purchase coloured graphites now, or even introduce something like an acrylic paint, but that does change your ability to manoeuvre the graphite on the surface. Once you introduce something like an acrylic, it bonds with the graphite and you can't push it around as easily or remove it. This is an image of a detail from the completed work and a short clip of the installation. So happy drawing, everyone, and a big thank you to the Bakehouse Arts Complex and Jennifer Prince for coordinating drawing us in.